development banks, as well as experts of ILO in the Pan American Health Office. I would like to inform you that the event will take about an hour and a half, during which we will listen to speakers and we will also answer your questions. Please use the Q&A function that you will find in the lower part of your Zoom screen to send us your concerns. Also, we have a simultaneous interpretation. English, Spanish, Spanish into English. You can activate that function clicking on the interpretation icon in the lower part of your Zoom screen. We invite you to participate and to share your valuable ideas and comments through the social networks. Without further ado, we give the floor to Ana Virginia Moreira Gomez, Director of the Regional Office of ILO for Latin America and the Caribbean, who will open the event with some initial comments and some interesting data. Ana, go ahead, please. Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here on this very important event, both for ILO as well as for the labor world. Climate change has caused meteorological and climate phenomena that are extreme all over the planet, as shown by the increase in the frequency and the seriousness of heat waves, the heavy rainfall, the forest fires, droughts, and tropical cyclones. All that is having serious effects on the occupational safety and health of workers, who frequently are the first ones to be exposed to these hazards, usually for longer periods and with more intensity compared to the general population. The hazards associated to climate change have been related to different effects on health, like cancer and cardiovascular diseases, respiratory disorders, problems with the eyes, and mental health. The financial repercussions are also significant due to the loss of productivity, the interruptions of economic activities, and damage to infrastructure. According to the new estimates of ILO, every year, at least 2,400 million workers are exposed to excessive heat. That is, more than 70% of all the workers. If we compare the level of exposure for 2020 with those of the year 2000, we see an increase by 34.7% in the number of workers exposed to excessive heat. Furthermore, 1,600 million workers are exposed every year to ultraviolet radiation from the sun. It is calculated that every year, more than 1,200,000 workers die due to excessive heat, poisoning with pesticides, air pollution, the work size, skin cancer, melanoma, and parasite diseases communicated by vectors, all that related to climate change. According to figures by the global database on natural disasters and technological disasters, for the period between 2003 and 2023 in the region of the Americas and the Caribbean, there were more than 291,000 deaths and about 300 million people affected by the disasters. At the regional level, we have experienced an increase of more than 0.5 Celsius degrees in the temperatures in the last 3 decades, and anomalies in rainfall and with a variation according to the different areas of up to 60% in 2022, according to a report by the World Meteorological Organization. In the region, Latin America and the Caribbean suffer endemic vector-borne diseases by dengue and chikungunya, which are expanding in the region due to climate change. Epidemics, chronic kidney diseases of non-traditional origin are affecting many workers who do heavy work and manual work in warm temperatures. In some countries and regions of Latin America and the Caribbean, there are radiation indices that are extremely high, reaching maximum values in that index. In order to address this situation and manage labor risks related to climate change, we need legislative responses, integrate measures in the legislation related to occupational safety and health, the environment, and climate change. Develop guidelines, guides, and protocols that are more specific and practical. We also need awareness campaigns and expand the research agenda in order to better understand the impact of climate change on workers and the interaction amongst the different risks. In today's event, the representatives of organizations of workers and employers of different countries will talk about the measures that they have taken. Also, we will have representatives of the Latin American Development Bank and the Caribbean Development Bank who will talk about the funding they offer to the countries of the region in order to adapt to climate change. We hope that this event will be of great value and will contribute to the dissemination of good practices, helping to fertilize the fields, cultivate ideas in order to take measures and for the development of interventions that are needed urgently in order to protect the workers from the negative impact of climate change. So welcome all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ana, for this warm welcome and for opening the webinar. The figures are really astonishing. More than 2.4 billion workers, as Ana told us. In other words, equivalent to 70% of the global force is exposed to excessive heat. And the worst thing is probably still coming because temperatures continue to increase. Every year, we register more than 1 million fatalities due to labor risk related to climate change. So now let's invite our colleague, Ana Catalina Ramirez. Ana Catalina is an expert in occupational safety and health at the Geneva headquarters, and she will talk more about these risks exacerbated by climate change. Ana, welcome. Please tell us what are these risks, how are they interrelated, and what's their impact on the health of the workers? Sveti, hello, good morning. Good morning to all the participants in this event. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Well, I would like to say, in answer to your question, that the effects of climate change on the safety and health of workers is distributed in different ways according to the region and according to productive sector. And when I talk about different impact. I'm talking about unequal impact. We have groups of workers that are specifically exposed to the effects of climate change and to the resulting hazards and risks. For instance, all the workers that work outdoors in sectors that are physically demanding, such as agriculture, construction, transport, for instance. Also, workers in indoors who work in an indoor environment. Sometimes we forget about those who work indoors in environments that are warm and badly ventilated. Workers in emergencies, in health emergencies, and other public sectors related to emergencies and disasters that we shall see in a few moments. And of course, workers of the formal economy, migrants, workers in micro and small and medium-sized enterprises, where not only the effects at the level of health will be the same as in the other sectors, but also the capacity of response, prevention, and mitigation are lower, and thus the repercussions and the effects are greater. The report prepared by the ILO on occasion of this global day to ensure the occupational safety and health in a changing climate, that's the title, in addition to providing the figures already mentioned by the director and giving us a global overview of the situation related to climate change and occupational safety and health, focuses basically on six effects of climate change. Some of these effects are direct effects on health of the workers, and some of these effects have an impact on natural systems and also on the productive systems that will aggravate the risks that already exist in occupational safety and health or will create new risks. They facilitate a combination of different risk factors. The first effect mentioned in the report is, of course, excessive heat. I think that's the effect we feel the most, regardless of whether we work outdoors or indoors. The increase in the global temperature, well, we've seen that that's causing heat waves that are more frequent and lengthier in duration. And that will have an effect, of course, on the body temperature, which is related not only to the external temperature in itself, but also to the environmental conditions at work, for instance, humidity and the physical activity at work and the personal protection equipment. High risk jobs are those workers who have a lot of physical demand, agriculture, construction, fishing, but also those who may be in sectors where the workplace is not well ventilated, and there was no regulation for that. In terms of health, you already mentioned some effects in the introduction, but we clearly have what we call the heat effect, the heat stress, cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, and other disorders related to mental health. The second effect I wanted to mention, which is also a direct effect of climate change on the health of workers, is ultraviolet radiation, which unfortunately has increased due to the reduction of the ozone layer. The workers that are most affected are those that are exposed to high levels of solar radiation without even knowing sometimes, because the exposure is not something that involves tanning the skin, but sometimes we are exposing to that radiation without realizing. And basically, we have here all the workers that work outdoors. And in addition to thinking about the impact at the level of the skin, you have a skin cancer and others. We have other effects that are not neglectable, like those related to the eyes or weakened immunology. The third important effect precisely has to do with the impact on our natural systems. And those are the extreme meteorological phenomena. And those in those meteorological phenomena, they have increased in the intensity of those phenomena. For instance, storms or tropical cyclones, rain, and they will have an effect on our natural system. We've already seen forest fires or floods, but also the impact that they may have on serious industrial accidents or diseases that are related to the water, for instance, amongst others. This impact has required more than before the participation of emergency workers, and all the emergency workers are also affected. For instance, those that do the cleaning, and they are exposed to a higher risk related to occupational safety and health. And also the agricultural workers and those who work in fishing, who are directly affected by these meteorological phenomena.
In addition to all the physical affections that may come up, uh, such as diseases due to the fact that they are in contact with chemical substances that may be present during emergency situations. Well, we cannot overlook the emotional aspect, the physical and mental burden these workers suffer when they're constantly exposed to this kind of phenomena. The next impact we mentioned in the study is air pollution. The change of the meteorological patterns have had a serious impact on air pollution indoors and outdoors, because obviously if there's no good ventilation control of air, the air will be polluted indoors as well. And there is a greater exposure for workers that work outdoors, but also for those that work in heavy industries and heavy traffic, as well as those workers who are in transportation. And amongst the impact on health, in addition to lung cancer in the long term, we also have respiratory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, and also eye irritations due to this kind of contaminants. And we also talked about the impact on natural systems. Well, there we have to think about all those diseases conveyed by vectors. Climate change has been related to a greater number of these diseases, and not only because of the size of vectors populations, but also because of their survival and reproduction rates. And here, basically, we're thinking about all the workers who perform work outdoors and are exposed to biological risks in the workplace. And as the director mentioned, there's some impact on health, such as some diseases we know, like dengue, Chagas disease, and others. I don't want to elaborate on this because we have a panelist who will discuss this in more detail. And finally, I also mentioned the impact of climate change on the natural and productive systems. A clear example of this is the increasing chemical risk due to the changes there are in our natural system. So what we've noticed is that there is a greater use of pesticides that, amongst other factors, they are affected by climate change. So as a way to respond to the loss of soil effectivity, quality of new uh, pests, quality of cultures, when there is not necessarily a clear procedure to manage these changes, and then there is an increase in the use of chemicals in order to try to mitigate the impact. And this will clearly expose farm workers, workers in the agricultural sector, and those who are in production and the production of chemicals for the farming industry. So we see with cases of intoxication, neurotoxicity, obstructive lung disease, and cardiovascular diseases, and impact on the reproductive system. So we need to point out that this impact clearly shows how everything is interrelated, because climate change will not only have an impact on our environment, but it clearly affects our reproductive systems, our farming practices, labor practices, increasing a chemical risk within a context where there are high temperatures. And this produces a greater effect of these chemicals on health, especially for those workers who are also exposed to other types of risks already present in their workplace. And finally, what I would like to point out in closing is that climate change brings about a major reminder to all of us, because we usually forget that workers at their workplace are part of an ecological model. In other words, our labor environment is within the environment. So any impact on the environment will, of course, have a clear repercussion on our labor environment, on our labor practices. Sometimes we forget that we are part of all this ecosystem, and climate change reminds us of this, comes to show us the importance of taking this into account in our labor environments. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. This has been quite revealing. Thank you for explaining to us this connection between climate change and how it has an impact on natural environments, on the natural environment where we all live and work, and how it has an impact on our health, especially on the health of workers in a more substantial manner. Though these are no new risks, I think we are all becoming aware of the fact that this is increasing, and besides, they are disseminating due to global change. And thanks to your participation, we've learned that there is an interrelation between these labor risks, and it also affects our health. We understand that though the environment and the impact on the environment has an impact on all of us, there is a more predominant impact on workers, but not at the same level. Anna, you've said that some workers are more exposed than others, especially those who work outdoors, and more specifically, farming workers, those in fisheries, in forestry, transportation, civil protection, and all those workers who have to respond to emergencies. You've explained very well how they are all affected to a larger extent due to this impact we are noticing of climate change. We can continue with this conversation by giving the floor to our next speaker, Ana Claudia Gastal Fassa. Ana Claudia Gastal Fassa, she is an international consultant on workers' health at the Pan American Health Organization. Good morning, Ana Claudia. Could you? Good morning. Welcome. Could you tell us a bit more about how climate change has an impact on workers' health, and in particular, what diseases it is causing, and what are the trends in the region? Over to you. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of Vetamira, I'd like to thank the invitation and also to celebrate this day, a special day we are celebrating now. I honestly think that this issue of climate change is quite relevant. I checked the report prepared by the ILO for this global day, and it is quite comprehensive. I recommend it to you. Now, rather than being more specific about the risks originated and exacerbated by climate change at work, I think it is important to highlight the fact that the environment deterioration caused by climate change has an impact on the right to work. It has an impact on the possibility of working because now it is not possible to work due to high temperatures or the increase in the sea level, desertification, loss of productive land, and hours where it is impossible to work. There are situations where workers have to stop working due to excessive heat, for example. And I think this is quite an issue. And I would like to highlight the structural part of the problem. When we talk about the exacerbation of labor risk due to climate change, it should also be pointed out that it is not on the future. We are not thinking that we should do something to avoid something that may happen in the future. No, it's something that is happening now. I think that many people are convinced of this, but now though we see heat waves, and here in the US, there were days where it was impossible to go out to the streets due to the fires in Canada and other parts of the US. Well, all those extreme meteorological phenomena that have an impact on the air on the increase in the use of pesticides and diseases transmitted by vectors. All that means new risks for health, but more than anything, the intensification of existing risks, thus resulting in new diseases, because in terms of diseases transmitted by vectors, for example, we could have new pathogens, modification in the frequency of diseases, vectors that are now in areas where they did not go to before, the geographical change of the location of diseases. So all this scenario does not only involve an intensification of the frequency, but rather new diseases, modification in the geographic distribution, and all that. As it's already been pointed out, those workers that are mostly affected are those working outdoors in warm climates. But last year in Brazil, with all those heat waves, well, we had situations that we'd never had before indoors. Uh, they had never stopped before, but they had to stop working in warehouses and manufacturing areas and all those because of the serious effects. And emergency response workers are widely affected also, but there's also an increase in the burden of health sector workers in general. And this is something that we need to highlight. They will be affected by climate change because of all the additional demand resulting from all these new diseases. And as it was mentioned by Ana Catalina, we have this whole issue of informal workers, migrant workers, and I would also like to underscore here the situations of vulnerability that overlap. For example, we have workers in small mining, artisanal mining, that are there in the middle of the forest, and sometimes they cannot work, and so they have to go to work at earlier hours, and they will be more affected by uh, diseases transmitted by vectors. All these things are sometimes are combined by uh, situations resulting from a poor housing, lack of water supply, uh, slavery, child labor, and all those matters of great concern. I would like to talk about the exacerbation of excessive heat impact, especially on non-traditional diseases, especially occurring in tropical and subtropical areas, extreme heat. There's a high number of farm workers that are affected by this. And in 1998 and to 2015, there was a fivefold increase of chronic diseases amongst young workers. So this shows the possibility that this is a non-traditional chronic disease, not related to hypertension, diabetes, and other traditional causes. And why is this? Because of extenuating work, reduced rest time, and exposure to heat. So labor conditions associated to heat exposure are exacerbated by global warming that results in non-traditional chronic diseases. So this doesn't mean that there are no other aspects that may be toxic, such as pesticides or anti-inflammatories and all that. But the things that they do not account for the epidemics we're seeing in Central America. And here we need to take all these things into account, labor conditions, and in this case, set up some prevention strategies that may be related to uh, good hydration with a good water supply and good rest areas for the workers. But it is not only, it's not enough to promote these more specific protection measures. We should also give it a more structural look. It's important for workers to participate in all these diagnostics processes. The workers in the region tell us, oh, there's no way how to protect ourselves with our PPE from these chemicals and not die of a heat stroke. So this can become even more serious. So we need to find some other options, and we need to think that those more affected are informal workers. We need to provide universal social protection for those workers. We need to transition to a green economy. And now we are talking about the challenges in order to face the problems to address the problems in the region. The diversification of the economies, production of more added value. In other words, we need to train those workers who are losing their jobs due to climate change and also due to some other reasons, so that they can get some other kinds of jobs. And we should also think about interventions addressing structural aspects such as labor conditions, housing conditions, social services, amongst other aspects. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ana Claudia. This has been very illustrative. As Ana Claudia was saying, yes, we are losing the labor space due to heat waves, desertification, water supply. The ILO issued a report in 2019 on the impact on productivity of excessive heat due to excessive heat. Here in Peru, we're seeing some ultraviolet radiation indices that have been quite high, top limits in some areas of Peru, and we've also noticed an increase of the vectors transmitted by vectors such as dengue and chikungunya. In fact, here in Peru, just to give you more information, these diseases have tripled and even quadrupled this year. Thank you very much, Ana Claudia, for mentioning those observations related to the fair transition and the need to make sure to have a fair transition within this energy transition we are facing in order to address climate change. Without any further ado, let's open up our first panel made up by government representatives who will talk about measures that governments are adopting in their respective countries to address and manage these labor risks exacerbated by climate change. We welcome Mr. Omar Nassif Stefan, Director General of Social Welfare of the Department of Labor and Social Welfare of Mexico, Alexander Astorga, Vice Minister of Labor of Costa Rica, Christian Sergio Gatti, Technical Advisor, Prevention Management of the Superintendency of Labor Risks in Argentina. We also welcome Silvana Bittencourt Machado, General Sub-Inspector of Labor and Social Security of Uruguay, and Pamela Gana, Superintendent of Social Security for the Ministry of Labor and Social Security of Chile. Welcome, Mr. Nassif. Good morning. The microphone is all yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, of course, for the invitation of the ILO to talk about this relevant issue that is so relevant all over the world, but especially in our region. I think that the countries in the Latin American region have been very much exposed to the impact of the climate change, and specifically the impact of climate change on the health of workers in our countries. I want to talk about the three regulatory actions that we are taking in Mexico precisely to address this issue and to develop a protection framework that is adequate for the workers in our country. And what results of the deep social dialogue process we have obtained with the organization, the different organizations. So the first two regulatory tools are technical instruments in Mexico. We call them official Mexican regulations. We have 34. Some of them are oriented to organizational issues. Others are related to the protection vis-a-vis health risk. Others are related to safety. And we also have others that are for specific sectors. For instance, we have specific regulations for mining also for different environmental pressures, for instance, of the divers. And we have other regulations for the protection of workers in farming, the farming sector. And that's the first instrument I want to talk about. At the end of last year, after a process of almost a year and a half of social dialogue in our standardization committees, we issued new regulations for occupational safety and health in the farming sector. This is a result of the updating of two regulations. We have a 1003 for the farming sector, safety and health conditions, and the other one, 007, for machinery, equipment, and tools also in the farming sector. As a result of this process of consolidation of the regulations, at the end of last year, we published this new regulation that will be effective at the beginning of last year and contemplates different things to protect the workers in the sector, especially to those exposed to climate change. First, the obligation of identifying in writing the requests of the farming workers, and this is obligation of the employers. They have to communicate the risks and hazards that they are exposed on the job. And of course, the updating also considers the inclusion of safety sheets in the management of the handling of agrochemicals. Of course, the supervision of the use of machinery and equipment to make sure that there are no accidents in the handling of this equipment. Also, the prohibition of having people of less than 18 years of age working in the farming sector. That has been valid for the last 3 years due to the risks related to climate change. And we need to update the regulatory framework to prohibit the participation of minors, specifically in these activities. Also, the prevention of risks in jobs in heights, in altitude, exposure to noise, the exposure to vibration, exposure to high heat conditions, and all this related to monitoring of the health of the personnel by an expert, a medical expert with experience in the field on an annual basis with periodic exams of these workers. So 003 for the farming sector establishes a very broad regulatory framework for the protection of workers in the farming sector. It is related to other regulation that is also relevant, which is 015, 2001, high temperatures that precisely seeks to protect the workers exposed to a work environment in which the conditions due to the environment or due to a specific condition, a specific piece of equipment, are duly monitored because of their risk to be exposed at high temperatures uh, can have a serious impact. And related to these new regulations that protect the workers in the farming sector and specifically the workers exposed to high temperatures, we have the updating of our table of diseases. In Mexico, I was saying the tables had not been updated for 50 years, and last year we did it. And we standardized the classification according to the WHO because now it can be compared uh, with other countries and within the same country in order to identify what are the main risks at work and identify the workers exposed in their different jobs to highlight two diseases related to ultraviolet radiation. One, melanoma, the code Z30 in the global classification. Number two, carcinoma, that is also a disease that is included in the International Classification of Diseases. And precisely, starting from the effectiveness of the table of diseases, we will be able to start to see at the end of this year, based on the statistics of the Mexican Institute of Social Security, we can see how much of these diseases have increased in the last few years and how much they are related to a type of occupation or a class of risk in particular, speaking very concretely, related to the farming sector. So the updating of the regulatory framework is very recent. We still have to wait what's the impact and what are the administrative records that result from this updating. But we are sure that the regulatory framework has properly responded to climate change. And of course, based on the practice, we won't stay there. We will continue updating it based on the experience. And of course, through a process of social dialogue with the organizations of workers and employers. So that's it. I'll wait for the participation of my colleagues and congratulations to the ILO for organizing this forum. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Nassi. Congratulations for the adoption of these new regulations and the legislative updates, which are so necessary to respond to climate change. And also, as you mentioned, in the sectors that are more affected, such as farming, with measures of effective management, such as the need to inform the workers about the risks or how climate change and global warming and extreme temperatures are affecting them and how to protect them against this risk. In addition to ensuring that there are safety sheets for the use of agri-chemicals and that measures are taken to protect workers from extreme temperatures. Thank you very much for providing this information. Our next guest is Mr. Astorga, Vice Minister of Costa Rica. Mr. Alexander Astorga, you have the floor. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you very much. First of all, my special thanks to the ILO and my recognition for organizing this event on such an important topic. Precisely, we had a week of occupational health, as we call it in Costa Rica, where we had different activities last week discussing these topics, and the approach was climate change and its impact on safety and the working conditions of people. Regarding our role, the role of the governments and the different public entities that are in charge of protecting or looking after these issues. In Costa Rica, we have the National Council of Occupational Health. It's a tripartite committee that gives advice to the Ministry of Labor. And we've been promoting from there several issues in order to be better prepared to the impact of climate change on the safety and health of workers. In that sense, there are four approaches that we consider to be very important and on which we have worked. First, the previous speakers have spoken about prevention, how to generate preventive measures in order to prevent the repercussions of climate change on people. And here we have the issue of protection against heat stress. And also, we have discussed a lot about that. And there's another important issue, which is a more educational approach for the different sectors, for the employers and the workers themselves, so that they may understand the importance of using equipment, for instance, and the importance of applying these preventive measures, amongst other issues, because we do understand that At the end of the day, although the regulatory framework uh, it gives the employer different obligations, there must also be a commitment by the workers to follow the different protection measures, at least here in the Ministry of Labor, and especially yours truly, who've been in different inspections. I've seen how on many occasions that they have the personal protection equipment, but the worker doesn't like to use it. They modify their uniform. So there's one aspect that has to do with the education, explaining the different actors, especially the workers and the employers, how important it is to consider these issues. And then, of course, we have the corrective approach. And part of what we seek is that when we identify certain practices in terms of occupational safety and health, especially related to climate change, such as the non-use of measures against heat stress, the incorrect use of agrochemicals, and these other situations, as previously mentioned, well, we resort to the establishment of corrective measures so that before moving on to a more coercive uh, measure, we try to correct those practices on the work site, and that has generated a very good results. And then, of course, the uh, other measures through sanctions. And in order to focus on these four axes, we need collaboration amongst the different instances of the institutions. Although the National Council on Occupational Health is the governs or is the one in charge of proposing different regulation, the national inspectorate is the one that identifies different situations, and therefore we need coordination between the inspectors and the regulatory instances. And that has been something that we have adopted and that has given good results, especially part of what we've been doing in the last few years is to train a group of special inspectors so that they can do visits to the work site. So with these four axes and approaches, we have resources to three tools that we have used in order to strengthen our work in this issue and address these issues. Specifically, we could talk about the situation of heat stress and agri-chemicals. Costa Rica is a tropical country, so many of these issues have occurred for many years, especially with the banana, also in the south where we have coffee, or in the ports where there have always been situations of a heat stress. However, with the climate change, now the heat maps have been modified. And now in the Central Valley, we have areas with high temperatures as well. So although we already had some experience on these topics, we've had to use more tools. First, regulations. We have created special regulations for these issues. For instance, we generated a regulation for the prevention and protection of workers exposed to heat stress. Also, uh, uh, establishing rest and shadow for these workers. Also, in the case of agri-chemicals, we generated regulation for the use of agri-chemicals and also a regulation on exposure to for workers exposed to pesticides. So these are basic regulations that allow us to generate protection and prevention standards. But in addition to that, there's an important part, which is the second tool, which is the awareness raising. We've been leading different information campaigns. We've been generating documents and provisions so that everybody can better understand these regulations, guides, for instance, that can help the employers to implement measures on occupational safety and health. And finally, the issue of the inspection. We have carried out focalized activities working together with the National Directorate of Inspections and the Council of Occupational Health. And sometimes the workers themselves complain about a certain issue, so it's necessary to have the National Council conducting a special study on that problem. Not in all the regions, the conditions are the same. For instance, in the Caribbean, there's a lot of humidity, and these conditions also have an impact on the working conditions. So it's necessary to conduct certain studies to generate recommendations that are more appropriate depending on the different features of the area, the work done. It's not the same thing to plant banana or to do fishing. And thus, the conduction of studies that sometimes are done together with other institutes. So it's a very, very broad issue. We could keep on discussing a lot more, but thank you very much for giving me this space. It's also a valuable opportunity to learn from all of you and the expertise you have in ILO. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Thank you very much for sharing with us how you are addressing occupational safety and health through the four approaches that you mentioned. This is very valuable for all the people who are participating in this event in order to learn from each other, especially from the experience of Costa Rica and how Costa Rica is managing occupational safety and health in general, and specifically all these risks that are exacerbated by climate change. We see that in Costa Rica, as you mentioned, you have developed technical standards which are so necessary. For instance, a protocol for rehydration. What are the measures that people have to follow? The workers have to follow so that they are probably hydrated to address the excessive heat. Costa Rica has had a week quite busy last week on occupational safety and health with a very diverse agenda, very varied and interesting topics that they have shared through the events organized by the National Council of Occupational Health. So if you please could give us some information in the chat, maybe links where we can see the different debates that you've had, and that would be very useful for all of us. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Christian Sergio Gatti. Christian Sergio Gatti is a technical advisor, prevention management for the Superintendency of Labor Risks in Argentina. Good morning, Mr. Gatti. Welcome. You have the floor. Good morning. I'd like to thank you for the invitation to celebrate this special event. And we thank the ILO for the invitation. It is quite enriching for us to listen to all these experiences. We are taking back many things we will be replicating. Allow me to share with you a bit about what we are working in Argentina on these matters, especially as Alexander was saying, very wide topics that require more specific approaches, such as heat stress. In Argentina, we have some standards that are effective since 2013 that have limits for heat risks, cold risks, and amongst many others. And for some years now, we are in a process of updating these standards because of the technical and scientific progress we see in these matters. But not only that, but also because of climate change. So we think it is very important to have the standard the new standard that will become effective in July. It's called Resolution 30/23. I can write it down on the chat if you want to refer to it. Well, what we did was to take into account all the progress made in international standards in order to improve health standards and create a specific standard for the assessment of heat stress, heat exposure at labor environments. What's new, at least for us in Argentina, because we had not included it before, it includes the chemical elements that are required to conduct the assessment of the current situation. First of all, we increase the concept of risk factors. They are very personal. So when assessing heat exposure, we need more information. And another important aspect, which is what we discuss now, is a chapter we've called Extreme Temperature Alert. And we are including those assessments we conducted at labor environments that cannot be valid when analyzing heat impact. And as Ana Catalina was saying, now the heat cycles are not lasting, is just not only last more, but they are even higher. And this is important. This is an important work done with an interdisciplinary team in consultation with the National Weather Service. And that is very important because they give us some data that we can process and take to our sector for a better application. And of course, this is not the last step, but rather the first one. What climate change has is that, as the title of our meeting says, challenges, because we clearly have challenges for governments to be aligned, facing all the necessary changes we're seeing, and that will also be necessary in the future in order to cover all the characteristics of climate change. But we should do all that from this approach, because sometimes we just say, well, this is the regulatory framework, and this is what we're working, and people may think that that could be also valid in time. No, the idea is to have this endemic approach and see how we can improve the dynamics. And this is not so simple because we need to be making adjustments all the time. So what we also find interesting is to see the inclusion of heat waves, to take natural heat waves into account, not only at work, but this leads us to think about a later step. That is, how can we protect those workers that have been mentioned by the previous speakers. So those who are working outdoors, not only emergency responders, but also rural workers, delivery workers. The methods most countries have, such as the TGDH methods that many health and safety professionals know. But now we also have some other technical and scientific tools that, together with the weather service data, can give us an alarm system, can help us warn workers. So it's not only standards, regulations, but also tools for prevention purposes. In addition to that, we've also adopted the maximum action limits, not only permissible levels, but also an intermediate value that may allow us to take some preventive measures such as medical surveillance for workers. This is a very wide matter, but I would simply like to thank you for having given us this space, and we are at your disposal to share the information we've collected so far, covering different labor environments. We put them at your disposal. We offer you our expertise and the data we've been able to collect so far. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Gatti. Thank you very much for sharing with us the studies you've mentioned, the data you've mentioned, and the regulatory updates mentioned. Thank you very much for talking about the maximum exposure levels, something very, very important for the prevention of labor risks. Thank you very much as well for sharing this initiative. You are beginning to prepare the warning systems, especially for extreme weather conditions for workers. This is a very practical and of a very significant value. We'd really appreciate it if you shared with us the data and the regulations that you've mentioned. Include them in the chat room, please, so that the 235 participants can have access to all these good practices that you are sharing. Thank you. Next guest speaker is Silvana Bittencourt Machado, the Deputy General Inspector of Labor and Social Security of Uruguay. Ms. Bittencourt, good morning. Welcome. Over to you. Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here with you to share some of the measures adopted in Uruguay to control this issue. First of all, I'd like to highlight on the rural sector that faces a very high risk, as we've heard today. This, as what has been discussed by the Tripartite Commission of the sector, the meeting celebrated here at the Ministry of Labor with decree laws of 2009, 12, and 16 that had already described that the employees have adopted any necessary measure to prevent any serious risk for the health and of workers, and the employer has to suspend any activity that may involve a serious risk for the physical safety of the workers, and the right of the worker to suspend the task when there is a reasonable risk for his or her health condition and life, and report the superior without suffering any consequences as a result of that. In 2022, the President of Uruguay and the Minister of Labor issued Decree 38, 2022 on safety in the rural environment, in face of adverse meteorological effects that may produce either directly or indirectly damage to persons. And this describes a general protocol, and it states that the company has to have uh, rules and measures of protection, highlights other challenges, as well as it establishes in the event of electric storm and other phenomena that may put at risk the health and life of rural workers. The employer will have to suspend those tasks involving any risks while those conditions exist. The employer can replace those tasks that may not involve any risks. The protocols the companies should have will be adopted, taking into account their own reality, and should contain at least the measures to be adopted, the communication systems for emergency cases, and the emergency and contingency plans, taking into account the characteristics of the event, the place, and the experience based on the occurrence of those events. The decree approves the general protocol included as an annex to it, where we can see that it mentions as responsible the entrepreneur or head of the establishment. It points out that the workers should have a general knowledge of the conditions in the area where the activity will be carried out, and proper training and mandatory use of personal protection equipment for the activity. If there are electric storms, uh, work close to trees or antennas should be avoided. And in order to protect the persons, avoid running and keep at a distance of risky areas. It's recommended to avoid using the metal tools while the electric storm exists. In the event of hail, thunder, or strong winds, the activities outdoors should be suspended and take shelter, providing safe areas until the conditions, good conditions resume. For areas, so rivers, or lakes where there are crossings or streams and the presence of cattle in floodable areas, special vests should be worn, making sure that those water streams are safe. In the event of occurrence of any adverse weather event, the speed should be reduced when operating machinery or driving vehicles. And finally, those workers, when completing their work, should take their cell phones so that whenever there is an emergency, they can make use of it, knowing the emergency numbers and numbers of firemen and the police. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and then I'm at your disposal for questions if there are any. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Bittencourt. Very interesting, this protocol you have for workers in the rural area and the performance and measures that should be adopted in the event of extreme weather conditions, and the obligation to suspend those tasks that involve any risks whenever these extreme weather events happen. Our next guest is Ms. Pamela Gana. Ms. Pamela Gana is the Superintendent of Social Security of the Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare of Chile. Good morning, Ms. Gana. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to share with you Chile's experience in this important matter. The establishment of preventive measures to workplaces whenever there's extreme heat. For 5 years now, in our sector, we are celebrating this global event, organizing different events throughout the month. I'll post the links of the activities we've had, and also covering different aspects related, but always emphasizing preventive measures uh, for safety at work. Now, regarding the preventive measures, we've been encouraging and regulating related to extreme heat. First of all, let me put into context that Chile, just like the rest of the world, is subject to this climate change, with some manifestations such as temperature increase, reduction of rainfall, increase of heat waves, and in the labor work as well. For example, in February of 2023, there was a record temperature above 40 degrees Celsius, producing mortal fires with the death of more than 24 people and damaging thousands of hectares of land. Earlier February of 2024, we had the highest heat wave ever recorded, more than 35 degrees average Celsius. In late March, we had the longest uh, heat wave of more than 11 days, and that has a cumulative effect on the health of workers. So when taking prevention into account, the Superintendency of Social Security ensured that the administrators of Social Security and professional diseases, the ones that manage the system, should provide technical assistance to all the employer entities, take into account disaster prevention, including high temperature events, so always within our legal framework, which is our labor code, that poses an obligation to ensure a proper and safe environment, understanding that the administrators of Social Security are specialists on prevention that should provide all the technical assistance so that the employers themselves may provide that safety. Now, why do we include disaster management related to extreme temperatures? Because we understand that threats of this kind can affect people, property, loss of property, and are of a natural type. And this kind of natural disasters are include weather events such as high temperatures. Now, what was the action plan established to be used by employers with the technical assistance of the administrators of Social Security, that they should include in their profession, the emergency and contingency plans, all the actions to be executed when exposed to high temperatures and extreme high temperatures, such as, for example, cases of workers that present some effects of high temperatures and communication measures.
So it was established that the plan should identify and assess risk due to this high temperature factor, identify the main disorders and diseases associated to it, identify the groups at risk and the individuals especially sensitive in order to put the focus on prevention. They define communication activities for people affected, and the development and implementation of emergency and contingency plans for managing the risks involved in disasters. These emergency and contingency plans that should be developed by the employers should have at least the identification of the company, the places where such plan will be applied, the general and specific objectives, the organization of the company, and both internal and external coordination, the roles and responsibilities within the plan, the risk matrix, identifying the different jobs and their risks, the identification of the groups of people especially vulnerable, And of course, the preventive measures to be implemented so that the workers in general and those in the specific groups can know what are the activities being carried out. Also, the National Service for the Prevention and Response to Disasters, which is a Chilean institution, every day gives alerts of high temperature and extreme temperature, and like a traffic light, so that it can be easily understood by everybody. And that is broadly disseminated through the means of communication and also through the administrative organization so that they can be known in the different companies so that measures can be taken. Besides, in December of uh, 2023, the superintendency provided 17 preventive measures vis-a-vis the exposure to high temperatures in order to seek communications in clear language so that the people and the employers could implement these measures. This was very important because it was highly disseminated through the press and through the administrative entities so that they could reach the workers. By way of example, these 17 measures are available, but by way of example, it involved uh, favoring natural ventilation, using different means. Also, the installation of shadows for the rest of workers in case they do not naturally exist. Mechanical aids, and this is very important when there are tasks that are physically demanding that could have an effect if there are extreme temperatures. Also, we established the modification of the work and rest cycles in order to increase the rest periods during high temperature episodes, and also inform the workers and the work centers about this traffic light published by Senaprev. So I think that these are important measures that were well received, but we also focus on those 17 measures incorporating other aspects, such as consumption of more fruit and vegetables that will provide water to the body and also hydration, but also to ensure monitoring of health of workers, especially those who are especially vulnerable. For instance, people with kidney, respiratory, or heart problems, or people of more than 65 years of age. Also, in January, a campaign was conducted with between the government and the Social Security Institute regarding preventive measures vis-a-vis high temperatures at the work site. And we do this together because we understand that the protection of the workers involves a joint work, the states, the government, the employers, and the workers. The three have to work together. So aside from these specific actions in Chile, we have followed a path putting prevention in the center. And we have ratified conventions of the ILO, for instance, 187 several years ago. And in 2016, we developed a national occupational safety and health policy, which is about to be published, its updates, which includes issues such as how to address climate change in that new policy, in that national policy that we want to share with you soon. Also, addressing prevention from a systematic point of view uh, allows us to address emerging risks from a preventive point of view in order to achieve decent work, economic growth, with a view to advancing towards a more social justice. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Ghana. The obligation of developing emergency plans and contingency plans in case of disasters is definitely very important. Thank you very much for sharing the example of Chile. And also, it's very interesting to see how your government, your institution has made sure that the employers will know how to develop these emergency plans through this created obligation, whereby the entities responsible for the insurance will provide technical assistance to the companies so that they can develop these emergency protocols and plans. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, everybody, to all our guests in this panel. We will continue with the next panel. We realize that we are a little bit late in the agenda. However, I think that this is a very interesting event, very enriching, with a lot of relevant information that our guests are sharing with us. So we would appreciate it if you could continue with us in order to listen our next debates and hear from our guests more information on the on this topic. We shall continue with the next panel. The next panel is made up by representatives of the employers and workers, and they will talk about how their um, institutions are supporting employers and workers in the management of all these risks that are exacerbated by climate change. So let's welcome Kaida Rees, Secretary for Sustainable Development of the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas. Also, we welcome Michael Anises, General Secretary of the National Trade Union Center of Trinidad and Tobago. We're not sure if Mr. Aniset is here or not. Please let us know. Welcome to Rafael Ernesto Kickbush, Manager of Occupational Safety and Health at the National Confederation of Industry of Brazil. Also, Mr. Ronald Ramlogan, Executive Director of the Employers Consultative Association of Trinidad and Tobago. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Please, and the floor to Mrs. Rees. Mrs. Rees, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Greetings from the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas. Thank you, the ILO, for the invitation to this event within the framework of the celebration of the World Day of Occupational Safety and Health. This has been a very important issue in our institution. In our political documents, and before that, together with other social movements that address social and trade union issues, we've been discussing that occupational safety and health should be developed in a proper environment where the workers can develop an activity with dignity, where we can participate in improving safety and health. So much so that in 2012, we launched a document, Strategies in Occupational Safety and Health in the Americas, recognizing valuable experiences of a trade union organization in different parts of the Americas, with the adoption of plans, participation in training, and articulation as different levels for the prevention of hazards. This reflects an enormous piece of work that the trade union organizations have been carrying out at the national level, and even outside of the countries at the work site, fighting for better working conditions of the workers. There are different factors that affect occupational safety and health. As we've heard before by other guests, we have aspects such as lighting, ventilation, the impacts of heat, noise, vibration, radiation, amongst others. However, due to the transformation of an aspect that affects our life, which is the climate crisis, some of these factors generate more impact on the working class, especially in sectors exposed to higher temperatures. One of those impacts, I would like to mention that we have heat stress, the burden of heat that workers receive, and the environmental conditions of the working site and the physical activity that they carry out, even the clothing they use at work. In other words, heat stress by itself is not a pathological aspect. The cause of the pathological symptoms that occur when we have excessive heat in the body, that's what affects the health of the workers. Also, this impact of the climate change is generating a psychological impact with the additional burden of fear, stress, and even uncertainty as to all these changes that are occurring with different disturbances in our mental health in all the working population. That's why we are working with different working groups.
This guy is so aggressive.
For instance, one focusing on the environment and the labor, and another one on social protection. And they address the impacts
I honestly don't really know
of the climate change on workers.
In the tournament, so we'll see what he has here. Hopefully, he has a strong
some
defensive game,
initiatives and
because
measures that we have promoted amongst the workers include an effective control
with the top pros, but maybe not as much
of the working times,
right? Like we haven't seen a lot
proper
of great
rest,
macro games out of him against
also
pro gamers. I'm
making
sure he can pull
that
it off, but we don't see him really choose that route. So anyways, no scout yet from Invade. Should be a gateway expansion.
We should
Pro
try
back
to
up
reduce
the
the exposure to heat,
Okay.
but also
so
extreme
normally what
cold.
happens if you go
Even
for
if they
Forge,
work
you send your
indoors
first
without
pro
proper
to scout so you can hide
ventilation
it for
or
cannon
proper
rush.
heating,
In this
we should
case,
take into
he brings it
account
back. He's
personal
just saving a
protection
little bit of economy,
equipment
throws on
in
the
such a
Forge. I
way
think
that
he
we
doesn't
can
plan a
protect
cannon rush, and
the
really,
body
honestly,
from
Zaw
those
is probably the last
environmental
player you could
conditions.
ever
We
do
should
something like
strengthen
that against, since
the
percentage of time that he
inspection
goes full
processes
force is going to be a lot
and
higher
increase
than other pro
training
gamers. He
on
does love
these
to get that
risks
aggression. Now the
to
drone and the
health in
probe
order
pass
to
each other
pay
as this
attention
drone leaves to
to
make a
the
patch rate over at
exposure.
that third base
The
location.
labor
Of course, the probe
detection
has to come in and check
systems
the
in
actual
our
timing of the
countries
spawning pool, see if there's a
should
gas,
work
and
together
in
with
fact
the
sees that
trade
there is
unions.
no
We
gas here,
have to
so
continue
not really
with
afraid at the
campaigns
moment.
for
The
the
probe goes over to the natural.
implementation
And going to throw that next time. He's going to have to get a
of
cannon
conventions
right away. Not going to
155
build
and
any probes in between
187.
either. You just got to have those timings down perfectly. If your opponent gets any lings in, you're gonna
Also
be really in a lot of
done
trouble.
by our institution.
Now,
In
4
addition
lanes
to
being made
that,
by Zawa.
we
Nothing-
have
nothing
discussions
really looks
within the
out of the
ILO.
ordinary so far, to be
For
honest. Like,
instance,
it's fine to go pool
the
first.
meetings we
This
had
isn't like
last
an
year
aggressive
on
9 pool. It's not a
occupational
quick gas or
health
anything.
and
it looks like this
safety
drone is probably coming out to make the
to
third hatchery.
strengthen
Now, I mean, Zergling rushes
collective
can be a thing against
agreements
Protoss, but definitely the 3 hatch
and
would be the
develop
first
capabilities
powerful, super
of
aggressive
those who
move that could occur.
participate in
So
the
that is gonna
negotiations
probably be
of
what we're looking
collective
out for here.
agreements.
and probably what Invade is going to be looking out for here as
within
well.
that
As far as
area of
Invade's
work
side goes, I
to
mean, it looks like a
continue
well-executed
making
build thus
efforts
far. He's got his
in order
gateway
to
coming
include
up, throws down the
the
gas in the main base. He has that
diversity,
single cannon, everything looking good.
especially
And
migrants
yeah, I mean,
and
there's not
informal
a
workers,
lot from him right now other than trying to get scouts out. He did lose that initial scouting
and
probe through the wings. Not
identify
the best probe micro there
the
against
differentiated
but he
impact
sends a
on
second
women,
probe
for
out to
instance,
get
and
that
those
additional
populations
intel, which is so
who
important.
suffer
Now, more
these
lings
risks.
are coming
And
out right now. Look at
finally,
that. 4 more
we
lings. What is he
insist
going to do with those?
on
We have the 4
working
lings
at the
over
global
here,
and
and then 4
regional
more lings.
level to develop
I'm
tripartite
thinking about
spaces
it.
like this one
That's an
to
overlord. Okay,
articulate
Zergling speed
amongst
does get
the
started.
different
It seems like
stakeholders.
he's
We
trying
continue to
to
support
do a
the
Zergling
trade
rush,
unions
but
in their
he's just kind of
efforts
hiding the
to
fact that he has Zerglings.
develop
The thing is,
national
you scout up
plans
with the
on
probe,
occupational
you can
safety and
kind of
health,
look at the
their
drones
socio-political role
and say, you know what,
in
this
the
doesn't.
generation
Oh, never
of
mind. He actually
national
runs
public
by
policies, but
immediately.
also
Not even waiting for the speed upgrade to finish. Can he
regional
actually get this? Oh my God,
policies
he's going to kill the cannon
on
with 2 lings left over. It
occupational
looks like the
safety
probes
and health,
can maybe
on
end up
social
killing the rest of these
protection,
lings. A little
on
bit of damaging down. He
the
definitely does
fair
need another cannon, though.
transition
I'm a little
to
bit
decent
nervous for
work
him.
and
Once
social
Zerg gets
dialogue. I
lings in
would
your
also
base,
like to
you're in trouble. Look at
share
this,
a
16 more
link
lings on the way
that I
for
leave on
Zella.
the
He's trying to
chat
end this game right away, and there is definitely the
on
possibility of that. This needs to be closed
the
up. Like, you
Labor
need something blocking
Observatory
here,
of
you
the
need something blocking.
Americas, where we have many studies and research studies, bulletins that touch upon these and other topics. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Rees. Thank you very much for explaining how your institution is supporting the trade unions and how you are supporting your workers in terms of occupational safety and health, and also in relation to other important aspects related to the labor world. And thank you for highlighting the importance of social dialogue with the social partners in the adoption of regulations and interventions by the authority responsible for managing labor risks. They tell me that our guest, Mr. Michael Anises, is not connected, so we will proceed with our next guest, who's Mr. Rafael Ernesto Kickbush, a manager of occupational safety and health at the National Confederation of Industry of Brazil. Mr. Kickbush, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I think that this is an important moment to reflect upon our actions to achieve more resilient, safe, and healthy work environments, as I mentioned at the beginning. I would like to thank you for the opportunity
To talk on behalf of the employers about the risks caused by climate change. I think that the risks mentioned in the ILO report, such as excessive heat, radiation, extreme climate effects are very well known by the international community and by the safety, occupational health and safety experts. And this is very important because businesses in general have conducted their preventive actions. They have preventive practices and protection equipment for workers, protection levels for workers. So these risks are not new. They are not unknown. They have been known for many decades now, with technical information related to this. And there is an aspect that I think that we should talk about here. How to build, how to connect all these practices through instruments. Here in Brazil, we've reviewed and changed many of our instruments and standards, such as the introduction of occupational risks and the integration of surveillance system related to the health of workers. And this is very important to understand and adopt the preventive measures that companies and businesses in Brazil and in part of Latin America have. So a second important aspect is the differentiation between prevention levels, that is at a micro and macro level, because at a macro level, we are not only talking about health and safety regulations, but also those covering the environment and specific protection measures. How to work jointly with all those techniques. That is very important to combine our occupational risk management to take into account these other opportunities, because one of our concerns is that we should not simply blame the companies when these are risks that are not ours. For example, in the event of a flood or when, so those are situations that are beyond the scope of a company. So how can we adopt preventive measures? These are different situations. So we need to have emergency plans with different emergency scenarios. So these prevention measures for the mitigation of these cases, initiatives and models are very important to cover all these situations. So I would like to mention just one last message. I think that businesses should be adapted and respond to environmental risks. This is important for everybody. There is this concern to connect these risks, these situations with all the other situations that do not pertain to the protection scope of the business. And that is why we need to operate with all the participation of all the social actors. And the practices we have in Brazil, when the government representatives in the previous panel, everything that has been said is there because that is what we have implemented in Brazil. We've changed, we've revised our instruments and our standards in Brazil and regulatory standards as well. So dialogue, talking with observers and all these social actors, that's something we've been doing for all the last few years in Brazil. And this is something very important if we want to strengthen the businesses, to strengthen dialogue and integration. And we're having more instruments that are being updated, and they are of the essence to define the right path the country wants and the businesses have in the future, how to contribute to reduce the impact of climate change and all the situations that can help us protect our workers in Brazil and in Latin America. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kickbush, contributing with these thoughts. We are talking about labor risks that are not new in essence, yes, but they are exacerbated by climate change. And also, thank you for mentioning the fact that these risks sometimes go beyond the scope of a business. They are in the natural environment that surrounds us, as our specialist Ana Catalina was also mentioning, and therefore it should be appropriate for the pertaining authorities to assist managing these risks that go far beyond the business environment, as with the assistance with alarm systems and the like. Thank you very much. Let us now give the floor to our last guest speaker in our panel, Mr. Ronald Ramlogan, Executive Director of the Consultative Association of Employers of Trinidad and Tobago.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here in this important discussion today. Thank you for having us. OSH is, in fact, everybody's business. So let's start right there. Certainly, however, the role of employers is pivotal in this discussion. And indeed, they can be important catalysts for change in navigating the complex landscape presented by the nexus between climate change and OSH. Now, from a legislative perspective, we are fortunate in the Caribbean to have a decent amount of coverage by country for occupational safety and health legislation, many of which have entrenched an unambiguous duty of care of employers to maintain a safe and healthy environment and safe systems of work. So in this regard, allow me to share just a few brief examples of how EBMOs across the Caribbean region are providing support to their members and the wider employer community. We're seeing that education, sensitization, and specialized training have emerged as really foundational pillars in many islands, and in the main, employers have demonstrated a desire to invest in training programs beyond their legal obligations to equip their workforce with the knowledge and skills necessary to navigate OSH challenges. In my opinion, this type of capacity building is absolutely crucial as it increases the potential for knowledge transfer. In Trinidad and Tobago, for example, we offer a unique training package developed by ACTEMP and the GIZ called the Sustainable and Resilient Enterprise Program, or SURE, which focuses primarily on improving the resilience of businesses in the face of major disasters, including climate-related impacts. This certification program includes key training on risk management and utilizing risk assessments to ascertain the impact of climate hazards on the workforce as part of a wider business resilience strategy of the organization. In Suriname, we saw where the Association of Suriname Businesses have rolled out the My Green Enterprise program to its members, which focuses on SDG 8 and 13 and promotes a combination of creating a healthy, safe, and efficient work environment while also promoting the greening of businesses. We're seeing support with the development of policies and other practical resources, such as with the Barbados Employers Confederation, who have developed an really innovative OSH box, which is a comprehensive OSH resource for employers and underscores their proactive approach to promoting compliance and risk management. These resources, ranging from safety policies to risk assessment forms, serve as invaluable tools and templates in fostering a safe and resilient work environment in the face of climate-related hazards. Employers are also actively engaged in advocacy to positively influence national or sectoral policies and legislation. You may recall in 2017, Dominica endured really major national devastation due to Hurricane Maria. And in response, the government created the Climate Resilient Execution Agency for Dominica to spearhead a national agenda to address climate change. This initiative received significant support from the Employers Federation, its members, and by extension, the business community, again demonstrating a commitment to addressing climate-related OSH risks. Colleagues, these are just a few examples, but it demonstrates how EBMOs are actively providing support, and additionally, through advocacy efforts, associations can further promote the modernization of OSH standards and regulations to specifically cater for climate-related impacts. At the firm level, I think it's important to note that employers are also engaged in social dialogue through the collective bargaining process. and we are seeing some specific OSH measures relative to climate-related impacts, such as heat work, inclement weather programs, and PPE adjustments that are becoming a standard part of several labor agreements. I think this is also important because it allows employers and workers to collectively tailor the workplace response to their specific conditions of work. Certainly, there's more that can be done. While business associations are committed to supporting their members, as I have demonstrated, many remain constrained by gaps in knowledge and capacity, some with outdated legislation, others with very limited financial resources to do more. For example, the informal sector may account for as much as 50% of economic activity in Latin America and the Caribbean, and therefore, this represents a significant number of economic units that we still need to reach. So as we chart our course forward, especially considering the importance of what is before us, I think it's essential that we are able to reaffirm what is really a collective responsibility to foster a culture of safety, a culture of resilience, and indeed sustainability for our workplaces. Thanks for allowing me to share.
Thank you very much, Ronald. It's very interesting to see the wealth of information and tools that have been produced in the Caribbean, in the example that you shared by the ILO and also other development cooperation partners such as the German GIZ. It's good to know that you have produced that tools, that they're available to employers, to companies and enterprises, so that they know actually what are the risks and how to prevent them and how to manage them effectively. It's also very interesting to know that collective bargaining is ongoing, and that measures, as you mentioned, measures on PPP adjustments are being taken in relation also to the needs that we are seeing and produced by climate change. Thank you. Entonces, con esto vamos a cerrar este panel.
Well, so in this way, we will be closing this panel. In fact, Mr. Ramlogan has also mentioned the limited financial resources there is. So this leads us to our next panel, to our next speaker, who are Ms. Vivian Diaz, specialist of education and main executive of the Latin American Development Bank, and Mr. Paul Saunders, Environmental Sustainability Officer of the Caribbean Development Bank. Good morning to our guests. The financial institutions play a key role in the adaptation and preparation to face climate change. Today, we will hear firsthand how the Latin American Development Bank and the Caribbean Development Bank are funding the countries in the region in order to facilitate adaptation to climate change. Welcome and good morning, Ms. Vivian Diaz. Thank you very much. Good morning to all. Thank you, ILO, for inviting us to be part of this event. It's been very interesting to listen to all the experiences shared this morning on the progress made in each country, but also the challenges involved in the guarantee of safety of workers within this context of climate change. We are a regional development bank committed to improving the living standards of all Latin Americans and Caribbeans. We want to promote sustainable development and integration, and it's been operating for 56 years. It started as an organization of the Andean countries, but now we have 24 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean that are members, to whom we provide financial advice and financial support also with advice so that they can strengthen public policies such as the ones mentioned here, so that that can improve the quality of the impact we are promoting. Some years ago, the board of directors of the bank gave us a mandate that is to be a green bank for the sustainable and inclusive sustainable growth of the Caribbean and Latin America. So let me tell you a little bit about how we are conducting our actions facing that mandate, and from two specific agendas, one on climate change and positive diversity, and another one focused on social and human development. Regarding climate change, what we're doing is to prioritize several actions that can help us actually become a green bank. We are incorporating sustainability criteria in all the operations and projects the bank has with the countries. We're also developing new financial instruments that may allow us attract capital from international markets that are prioritizing this type of funding. And we're also promoting the participation of strategic actors so that we can, in coordination with countries, generate solutions for the mitigation and adaptation in this aspect. Our goal is for all our projects and operations be aligned with the Paris Agreement to 2026. So the goal is to approve at least $15 billion for the adaptation to climate change. So in that regard, the 24 member countries we are promoting the use of these resources. We want to be a bank that is having green funds that operates in a green fashion, and that funds operations that take these things into account. We have three pillars that allow us to put all this into practice. For example, more green funding. We've developed a social and environmental framework so that all our projects can have a cross-cutting view of climate and biodiversity. We are investing on projects with a positive impact on the climate and biodiversity approach, and we have green funds promoting these mechanisms in the capital markets and mobilizing capital from the private sector. We even manage green funds such as the climate green fund or the adaptation fund. And as I said, we work with other financial partners. And this is very important because we have the source of funding that prioritizes this approach on public and private investments. And on the other hand, we have these human and social development agenda. There, what we do is to support countries to reduce their inequality and social exclusion gaps. That's generating capacities and more mobilization among citizens so that they can have access to better opportunities for citizens. We have a health and nutrition agenda where we are supporting countries in aspects related to food security, health networks for healthcare services. We have an educational agenda where I work directly, where we promote the development of infrastructure for learning processes, inclusion of new technologies, and we also have social protection issues.
En este trabajo es promover el desarrollo también de
We
alianzas.
promote the development of strategic alliances, also the intersectoral work, and we make sure that the projects provide comprehensive solutions. There is one topic that has to do with what we've been discussing here, which is the development of capabilities amongst workers. We believe that one of the key factors to close the gap of inequality in our region is precisely to make sure that the professions are addressed to the protection of the environment, to mitigate the negative effects, for instance, environmental pollution, so that from that perspective, they can help develop this labor market. The ILO is leading the discussion in our region. We know that that we must update the capabilities of the employers and the workers in relation to the preservation and protection of the environment. That is very important. For instance, the efficiency in the use of energy and raw materials, the reduction of greenhouse gases, the reuse of waste, restore the ecosystems. We're working on that as well. These are all objectives of the countries that little by little are becoming public policies and programs and projects so that the employers, the workers, and public institutions may do that transition in a fair way, in an inclusive way, and from the point of view of climate action and from the point of view of human development, we seek to contribute to the achievement of that objectives. We have a very important action in terms of supporting the educational systems for professional education to help everybody adapt, creating supply of education or improving the existing ones, proposing retraining schemes, upskilling as well for the workers that will allow them to act in the proper way within this accelerated transition. So basically, that's it. I'll leave in the chat the link to our website and some documents of reference so that you may know a little bit more about the action of the bank in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Diaz. Very enriching to know about the many projects that you are supporting from your institution and that you finance these projects precisely to adapt to climate change and to make possible the energy transition and to support the transformation of jobs and the creation of green jobs to protect the environment and so on. Now, we'll give the floor to Mr. Paul Saunders. Paul Saunders.
Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Ladies and gentlemen, let me, on behalf of the CDB, wish to thank the ILO for extending an invitation to the bank to participate in this webinar on a very important topic that we think safety and health at work is indeed a critical element in the world of work. And I salute the ILO for establishing the World Day for Safety and Health at Work with the aim of promoting the prevention of work-related accidents for both individuals and organizations. This year's theme in particular, which explores the impact of climate change on occupational safety and health, is very interesting and one that resonates with the work that the CDB does on a daily basis. The issue of climate change and workers' safety and health is very important and is a key aspect of any work that we do at the bank. As climate change intensifies, workers worldwide face increased risks due to hazards such as excessive heat, ultraviolet radiation, and extreme weather events. And we have to ensure that we play our part in protecting their safety and health in projects funded by the bank. Now, to give you a little bit of a background to the Caribbean Development Bank, the work of the CDB is very much focused around the issues of climate change impacts and ensuring the health and safety of both workers and the community around their projects. CDB started operations in 1970 with the specific purpose of contributing to the harmonious economic growth and development of its borrowing member countries and promoting economic cooperation and integration, and among them having special and urgent regard to the less developed members of the region. Our mission, which speaks to reducing poverty and transforming lives through sustainable, resilient, and inclusive development, is our guiding mantra. The CDB is committed to helping its borrowing member countries reduce inequality and halve the incidence of poverty by the end of 2025. We currently have 28 members of the bank, 19 of which are what we deem as our borrowing member countries. Now, our core business is financing, and one of the key things that we do look to finance in our jobs is ensuring that health and safety is able to be focused on as we undertake the projects. We mobilize financial resources on favorable terms from private capital markets, which our loan funds come from, and from other official sources where we get our special development funds of loans and grants. Now, we ensure and we seek to assist our BMCs to optimize the use of their resources in helping to develop their economies and to expand production, etc. Now, more importantly, it is that we act as a development agency and we provide technical assistance for capacity building as well as institutional development. Now, as we undertake our various projects, the CDB recognizes that achieving greater resilience will help to advance a variety of activities, and we have our new strategic plan, our updated strategic plan, which speaks to building resilience in 5 different areas. Now, when we speak to the integration of health and safety, all the projects of the CDB undertaken by the CDB undergo rigorous environmental, social reviews and assessments. These reviews are guided by our Environmental and Social Review Procedures, or ESRP. The ESRP outlines how CDB, within its mandate and operations, ensures that environment and social risks are managed. The ESRP includes 8 performance standards that reflect the principles, core policies, standards, and best practices approached and adopted and used in the treatment of sensitive environmental and social issues by the multilateral financial and development community. The bank itself has adopted 8 performance requirements that define the principles and objectives for addressing the treatment and management of environmental and social issues. In particular, the environmental and social appraisal is integrated into CDB's wider due diligence and project appraisal process. Now, we have a very specific performance requirement which speaks to community and worker health and safety. The CDB will not finance projects that do not meet its environmental and social performance requirements as defined in the ESRP. At a minimum, all projects financed with CDB resources must meet the applicable national environment and social legislation. CDB will not finance projects that contravene our borrowing member countries' obligations under international environmental or social arrangements, and that include any international labor laws that the country is signed on to, and specifically relating to health and safety. Under our performance requirement for community and worker health and safety, our borrowers will have to provide workers with a safe and healthy environment, ensuring that risks, whether it be biological, physical, chemical, or otherwise, inherent to the particular sector are identified, avoided, mitigated, or controlled. In addition, steps will be taken to prevent accidents, injury, and disease arising from work that present potential hazards to workers through the provision of personal protective equipment, controls to avoid or minimize risks, as well as having in place appropriate emergency response plans and procedures. Now, employment practices should at a minimum be consistent with the laws of the country. And whenever there are significant risks or danger of injury, the borrower needs to put in place the relevant procedures. The bank also requires that any environmental and social impact assessment undertaken should give attention to specific risks for women's health and safety and the use of hazardous materials. The resulting environmental and social management plan for the project, as well as the contractor's environmental and social plans, will include recommended risk management measures to manage occupational safety and health issues. The bank requires that all our borrowers must have the training and resources to be prepared and be able to respond to accident and emergency situations. So specifically, what about the impact of climate change on our projects? The bank does a climate screening for all of its projects, as we are very much aware of the impact that climate change has on our projects. The bank is very committed, and through its board of directors, they have mandated the bank to ensure that we are allocating or endeavoring to spend at least 25 to 30% of our loans on climate finance related activities. Our capital projects all encompass occupational health and safety as part of the implementation of the work. We require that a health and safety plan for employees be a part of the contractor's work plan. We require that our project management team, who oversees the implementation of the project, ensures that health and safety is a major issue in the implementation of the work. The contractor under all our projects is required to cost the measures for health and safety as part of their works and to ensure that it is part of the budget. The contractor is then paid either a monthly or quarterly amount, depending on the length of the project, to ensure that he or she covers the ESMP implementation and the health and safety activities that are required. When we conduct supervision missions on our projects, we specifically check on the health and safety of the workers under the projects. In our recent project supervision, we try to ensure that these things are looked at. So in concluding, we just want to reassure that the Caribbean Development Bank continues to ensure that health and safety is a major aspect of all the work that it does in its various projects. And we are in alignment with the Paris Agreement in our work, and we will ensure that this remains a serious matter for the bank to deal with. So in closing, I would like to thank again the ILO for inviting the CDB to participate in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saunders. Thank you. It's very interesting to see how the bank is making sure that all the projects that it is financing are ensuring that occupational safety and health is respected. That's very important. That's very much appreciated. We also hope to see opening up of special funding lines for work on preparedness and adaptation to climate change. Hopefully that may happen in the future. Thank you very much. Bueno, pues la toma de medidas.
Very well, then the adoption of measures that are necessary to adapt to climate change to prevent the labor risks exacerbated by climate change require funding. And that is why these financial institutions play a very important role. So we take advantage of this event to invite governments to take into account the financial instruments that these institutions make available to finance these measures that are so necessary and urgent. On the other hand, we also take advantage of this occasion to make an appeal to the firms to consult about the lines of credit that the governments make available to finance measures to counteract climate change, since quite likely they will be able to finance specific measures on OSH since they are related to the adaptation and mitigation of climate change. So thank you very much. With this, we get closer to the end of this enriching discussion. So now we will proceed with our last speaker, Jessica Calvario. Jessica will talk about the research that the ILO is carrying out through the Vision Zero Fund on the impact of climate change on workers in the tomato and chili supply chain in the Jalisco region in Mexico. Even if we have a vision, an overall vision of how risks are evolving due to climate change, it's also true that we have a long path still to know in more detail how is it that the occupational risks and the meteorological conditions affect us on the job. So, Jessica, good morning. We give you the floor. Welcome. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to share this space with such an important panelist, and we are learning a lot about what the region is doing vis-a-vis climate change. As you already mentioned, in Mexico, under the Vision Zero Fund, a fund administered by the ILO, we are conducting a project that is looking into the needs, limitations, and opportunities in terms of OSH of the farming workers in the region of Jalisco, which is a state to the west of, in the west of Mexico. Oh. Probably some of you know the region. The Vision Zero Fund is a fund created and administered by the ILO after the collapse of a building in Bangladesh in 2013, where more than 1,000 people died, mostly workers in the textile industry, and unfortunately, due to the lack of safety conditions on the job. So that unfortunate event made us aware that we should ask for the creation of a fund. And this Vision Zero Fund was created to respond to those deficits, those deficiencies in occupational safety and health, especially in the supply chains. In that sense, the ILO, through the Vision Zero Fund, has been collaborating in different activities in the field, both in Asia, Africa, as well as in Latin America, especially in our region, in Colombia, Honduras, and Mexico since 2019, conducting activities and interventions basically in the coffee chain, and now in the tomato and chili supply chains. The projects that we are implementing in Mexico includes the improvement of the conditions and response to the impact of a new climate crisis, biological hazards, including COVID-19, and within this framework, a specific component for heat stress in workers. And with that first element, to seek the improvement of measures implemented at the national level, as I mentioned in the beginning of the session, to improve the capabilities of our partners, and finally, to have a safer and healthier working places. So since 2023, we are doing a research study in more than 120 farming workers who work in greenhouses for tomato and some chili species, in order to establish a correlation between heat stress and damage to the health of the workers.
This research that we are conducting is done in cooperation with the Mexican Social Security Institute of the government of Mexico that manages and protects aspects related to the health and safety of workers in Mexico, and with the University of Colorado, specifically with its Center for the Adoption of Measures to Protect Health and the Environment. The research is still ongoing. So far, we have some field data related to how workers are being affected by temperature, and that has an impact on the kidney health and heart, conducting a comparative analysis with other samples so as to generate specific protocols for the attention of these workers. I'm posting on the chat some material that will be more interesting than my talk, where you have some videos describing the visits, the field visits we have had during this research. And the first results conclusions are expected to be shared by the end of this year to conduct all these activities, just as in all the ones that we have. Well, we do them under the agreement and coordination of our constituents that have played a major role to have such a specific and substantial investigation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you very much. This research work being conducted in Jalisco, Mexico sounds very interesting, and it's on the impact of heat stress and other labor risks. This co-relationship and interrelationship between the various labor risks and how all this affects us. For example, there was a study conducted along these lines that had concluded that since there are higher temperatures, heat stress is higher, respiratory beat increases, and there is more intake of those hazardous chemicals used in agriculture. So these are very valuable studies because they make us aware of this correlation between the various labor risks and the impact of this interaction on the health of workers. Thank you very much to all our panelists and speakers. This has been a highly nutritious conversation. I hope it's been of great use for us and that you appreciate it as much as we do. Thank you to all our panelists and who are focused on how they are facing risks resulting from climate change, from public policies. The panelists have shown us the path to follow with all these new measures that they have shared with us. These are innovative and timely and concrete measures, as we've seen, quite practical as well, that allow us to manage risks related to climate change in the labor environments. So, well, these are measures that facilitate, for example, the measurement of heat stress, the establishment of limit heat values, and the preparation in face of extreme weather, such as, for example, the mandatory protocol to be followed in Uruguay, the indications to have a good hydration that was developed in Costa Rica. We've learned about the fact that in Chile they have moved one step forward with insurance and health provision companies so that they may understand. First of all, they may understand how to adopt measures facing adverse weather conditions. In Mexico, there's been an update of the professional disease list, and there's a recent regulation focused on the farm workers, which we understand are one of the groups most seriously affected by ultraviolet radiation. We know that there are many concerns. We'll see the questions that they've shared with us in the Q&A chat. Well, the first question, let's see, comes from Brian Gutierrez, who asks about the update of the table of labor diseases in Mexico. Could that be used as a model for the update of labor disease in other countries such as Colombia? Could that be possible? Is Omar Najib still with us? If so, kindly answer this question. Thank you. Well, this is an enormous effort resulting of social dialogue in Mexico. This table of diseases had not been updated in 53 years. That was since 1970. So when conducting this update, we wanted to see what was the international standards in force. 11 diseases of the World Health Organization is the most current standard in general, not only for occupational diseases. So what we did was to analyze all this, to analyze what diseases could be included in the table of diseases to provide a more effective protection to workers in the country. In the conversation chat that we have, I shared the link of the official gazette of the Federation that contains the federal tables. That was the first publication made, the official gazette of the Federation in Mexico. And I also posted what was also published in the National Gazette, the list of labor diseases. It includes in greater detail causing agents, economic activities and job sites, clinical elements, causality criteria, lab studies, and some other studies. The idea is for health professionals for work-related issues should identify the risks and have a reference guideline, which is far more appropriate to be able to identify work-related diseases in Mexico. And in the drafting and preparation of these tables, what we wanted was to cover rights, human rights, but widely enough so that these tables could not be solely interpreted for certain types of occupations, because there are certain hazards to which a person may have, for which a person can have health insurance, but not necessarily due to the work being performed. For example, COVID-19 is a clear example as to how there are certain professions from a traditional vision of health and safety at work we could have thought was exclusively for the health sector. But with the development of the pandemic, we saw that there were certain occupations, like, for example, in the banking sector or supermarkets, they could also face these hazards or related to COVID-19. So otherwise, it would have been much harder to prove. So this has allowed us to have better cells and tables that are far more updated with international classification of diseases, and it also gives us a broader view of protection of labor human rights in Mexico. And I am sharing the links in the chat, and through the ILO, we've been able to share this experience that hopefully can be replicated in other areas. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nassib. Very interesting and highly valuable for all our participants. The list of professional diseases from other countries could be used as a good reference when updating the lists in any of our countries in the region. In the ILO, we also have a very recent publication of 2021 related to the diagnosis of professional diseases. Let's take one more question from Manuel Morales. Could you share the standards that you are developing so that we can manage the same standards all over Latin America? Is there an observatory of the policies being implemented related to climate change and health and safety at work? Well, in this case, I would like to answer this question and say that, well, yes, it is not an observatory itself, but this year's report prepared by the ILO has this function because it's compiled the standards and policies worldwide and also in the region that are taking climate change into account. So I invite you to take a look at this report that is available in the chat and also in the website. Well, so in this way, we are closing the event because we've exceeded our time, but it's been a very well invested time, quite valuable, and we hope that you leave this meeting very pleased as well. Climate change increases labor risks. 70% of workers are exposed to extreme heat. Millions of people are dying as a result of climate change. Therefore, we need to act now before it is too late. Global warming is not only a fact, but it is always evolving and it is progressing. Therefore, we need urgent measures to stop it and to protect ourselves. Measures that should be realistic, concrete, and feasible. Simple measures in many cases, of which our speakers have talked, and not only are they possible, but rather they should be standardized and systematically applied in our countries. Thank you very much to our speakers and to all the team that has made this event possible. Thank you very much to Mariana Lopez Torres, our operations assistant. Thank you, Miguel Aguirre, Gianfranco Fiorini, in charge of communications. We'd also like to thank our interpreters, Miriam Ramos and Claudia Checa. And we also thank Carlos Herrera and his collaborators who have taken charge of the technical aspects of this meeting. Thank you very much to all, and especially to all those who have joined this conversation, those who have followed us. Thank you very much for having dedicated this time to this very important topic. But before closing, let's take 1 minute to remember all those millions of workers who lost their lives as a result of their work.
A cerrar el evento con una nota positiva.
So let's close the event on a positive note. Though labor risks are worsening due to climate change, at least some of them, the ones that we've seen, they can be managed. Any risk is preventable and it's manageable. Let's always remember that it is always to prevent than to cure.
Diseases. These are just some of the dangers that are threatening the health and safety of workers and putting their jobs at risk. 2.4 billion workers are exposed to excessive heat at work every single year. And the total number has gone up over 35% over the last 2 decades. Our most recent data shows that over 26.2 million people are living with chronic kidney disease related to workplace heat stress. Excessive heat kills around 19,000 workers and injures around 23 million workers every year. UV radiation is impacting even more workers, around 1.6 billion, and killing 19,000 per year due to skin cancer. In addition, these 1.6 billion outdoor workers may be exposed to air pollution too, resulting in some 860,000 work-related deaths. Outdoor workers are also vulnerable to vector-borne diseases, which kill around 15,000 workers every year. Climate change is leading to an increase in the use of agrochemicals, putting the over 900 million agricultural workers worldwide at risk of exposure. Every year, 300,000 die of pesticide poisoning. Each of these climate-related hazards represents a threat in and within itself, but they are also uniquely interlinked and may result in a cocktail of hazards. The cumulative effect may pose an unprecedented threat to humanity, and we do not have the full picture of the real impact yet. This highlights the multidimensional challenge that lies before us. Climate change is a health issue. It is a workplace issue. It is also a social justice issue. But above all, it is a human rights issue. It needs to top the list of our global priorities. Going forward, workers and workplaces must be at the center of climate change action. Heat action plans must prioritize workers' safety and health. And legislation on occupational safety and health needs to mainstream climate change hazards as a matter of urgency. We are in a sprint to save lives, and the time to act is now.